Good evening, everyone. How are you tonight? Nice to see you. My name is Matthew Packwood, and I'm director of the Oregon Origins Project. First, a reminder, please silence your cell phones for the duration of the show, and there is no photography permitted. I want to thank all of you for showing up for the arts and live performance tonight. In these chaotic times, it is especially meaningful when we come together in community and support creative expression in all its forms. Thank you for being here with us tonight. We begin by offering a land acknowledgement and a call to action. The Portland metro area and the entire area of the confluence of the Columbia and Willamette rivers is the traditional homeland and fishing and gathering range of tribes throughout the region. We honor the peoples who have cared for the land since time immemorial. Tribes of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, Confederated Tribes and bands of the Yakima Nation, Cowlitz Indian Tribe, and many others. The Portland metro area today is home to the 9th largest urban Native American population in the U.S., descended from more than 380 tribes from across the country. Oregon Origins Project seeks to lift up and support the peoples whose lands these are, providing a platform for their artists and culture bearers to share their living traditions and artistic work. We ask you to join us in honoring and supporting Indigenous peoples. Please consider a donation to one of the Indigenous organizations at our website, oregonorigins.org. Tonight's event is the result of the dedication and support of many people. Thank you to the many visual artists here tonight in your collaborative spirit. It has been an honor to dig deep creatively with you. Thanks also to our partner, Stelo, who are presenting the Birth of Cascadia exhibition at their gallery in downtown Portland through July 12th. There are 5 people who have been an incredible support to the project and to whom we owe an enormous debt of gratitude. They are benefactor Ronnie LeCroute, geologist Ian Madin, Cooley Gallery Director Stephanie Snyder, conductor Ken Selden, and writer and curator Linda Tessner. These 5 have given so much of this to this project and in so many ways, and I'm grateful not only for their support, but also their friendship. Please join me in giving them a round of applause. Tonight is a night of many journeys. It is a journey across vast swaths of time, from the ancient past when the land did not yet exist, to the fragile present where its future is uncertain. It is a journey through geologic epochs when plates collided, volcanoes erupted, and glaciers flowed. It is a journey across the landscape, from the immense reaches of Hell's Canyon to the layered terraces of the southwest Oregon coast. It was also a journey for the artists to visit and explore the diverse natural wonders of our state and to plumb the depths of their imagination and envision how it all came to be. Thank you for being with us on this journey into the birth of Cascadia. And now, please welcome conductor Ken Selden, concertmaster Aromi Park, and the Oregon Origins Orchestra.
Good evening, and thanks for staying around for the second part of our show. My name's Ian Madin. I'm a geologist who had a long career in Oregon, traveling all over the state looking at rocks. And it's only in the last few years that I've gotten involved with art projects like this, and it's been just a blast to be able to go out with Matthew and the other visual artists and show them the landscapes that I love and talk to them about the geology behind that. So this is really exciting for me to have a chance to get up and talk to you about the geology behind the music and art that you have just experienced. And frankly, this is a geologist's dream, a captive audience and a PowerPoint presentation. So to begin with, we need to understand a little bit about how the planetary machine of plate tectonics operates, because Oregon's geology is all about plate tectonics. So we'll take a little bit of a moment to dive deep into the Earth and understand the basic structure and what drives all geologic activity at the surface. So the outer portion of the Earth is called the crust. It's a thin layer of rock between 5 and 50 miles thick, rock that is rigid and looks and acts like rocks that you're familiar with in everyday life. Beneath that is the Earth's mantle, which is also made of rock, 2,000 miles thick, but under such high temperature and pressure that it actually flows slowly over time like a liquid, unlike any rock you've ever experienced. And at the center of the Earth is the core. Geologists are really creative about nomenclature, right? The middle of the Earth is the core, like the core of an apple. And it is composed of liquid and solid iron, and it is extremely hot. And so that is the basic setup. Core that's hot, the mantle that is fluid, and the rigid crust that actually floats on top of the mantle. So the whole plate tectonic system is driven by one simple fact of physics, which is hot stuff rises. So as a hot air balloon rises into the atmosphere, a body of hot rock in the mantle rises through the mantle towards the surface, while bodies of cold rock in the mantle sink. And so what happens is that rock will get heated up in the mantle by its proximity to the core. And so a large body of hot rock will slowly rise towards the surface. And when it reaches the bottom side of the crust, it tends to spread out and make a convection cell. And what happens then as that mantle flows in this sort of a shape, it pulls the crust apart, makes a rift, and magma wells up into that rift and freezes into basalt lava and actually creates new crust at that rift. And these rifts are present in all of the oceans of the world. They are mountain chains thousands of miles long that are completely beneath the waves, except for Iceland. And as this process goes on, the two sides pull apart, more lava wells up, and the machine actually builds crust that spreads away from the rift. Now, because that crust is made out of basalt, which is very dense, it floats low in the mantle, as opposed to continents, which are less dense, which float high in the mantle. And so, because these areas are low, they fill them with water. And so, this is a sort of a startling but fundamental fact of Earth's structure, is that virtually all of the ocean floor around the planet has the exact same geology. It is basalt ocean crust created at these spreading rifts, whereas the continents are completely different kind of rock, granite, sandstone, and whatnot, that are much different in density and much more diverse. So we're busily building crust in the middle of the ocean, and it's spreading apart, and this happens at the rate of inches per year, which doesn't sound like much, but you add that up over millions of years and you make a lot of crust. So the problem is that the Earth is a sphere. So as you make more crust and you spread it away like this, around on the other side of the planet, something's got to happen because you're building too much. So what happens is, pardon me while I park, I hope I won't advance the slides while I park my, clicker, but the crust will, particularly when it gets very cold and dense, the crust will start to sink back into the mantle. And that is what's called a subduction zone. And so the crust is created at a spreading center in the middle of the ocean. It travels for hundreds or thousands of miles until it finally reaches a subduction zone where it sinks back into the mantle and is recycled. And in this way, heat from the core is brought to the surface of the Earth, cools off, radiating into space, and the cold rock cycles back around. And this process has been going on for billions of years, and it has driven virtually all of the geologic features that we see on the surface. So I'll give you a little bit of a picture here of how this manifests itself in Oregon. So off of our coast, we have an oceanic spreading ridge, one of these places where new crust is being manufactured. It's called the Juan de Fuca Ridge. It's between, 100 and 200 miles offshore, and it is actively spreading apart. You may have heard in the news recently talk about a volcano off of Oregon that's got an impending eruption. That is a volcano called the Axial Volcano that is in the middle of that spreading center that has had repeated eruptions over the past decades and is inflating again with magma, preparing to do it again. So this process is actively happening off the coast of Oregon. And the crust then is spreading towards our coastline. We are the leading edge of North America, the continent, which is a separate plate from the Juan de Fuca plate, which is the area between that spreading ridge and our coast. And when the Juan de Fuca plate comes up against the North American plate, it subducts and slides down beneath the edge of the continent into the depths. When it reaches a critical depth here, the water that it has accumulated by being at the seafloor for eons is boiled off essentially, and that reduces the melting point of the surrounding rock and causes magma to rise and make a narrow chain of volcanoes, which is called a volcanic arc. And that's our Cascade Range that extends from Mount Lassen in California all the way up into British Columbia. So that is our plate tectonic setting here. Active creation of crust off the coast and active consumption of crust underneath our feet by the subduction zone. So the subduction zone is probably about 25 kilometers, so maybe 18 miles straight down underneath our feet. And this is really cool. Just a moment here. I need another hand. So the subduction is continuing to move, but the fault that separates the subducting plate from North American plate is currently locked. And so instead of sliding smoothly, the subducting plate is bulldozing North America towards the northeast, and at a rate of a couple inches a year. And eventually we will have a magnitude 9 earthquake when all of that motion will be recovered and the North American plate will slide back 100 feet in this direction and recover its original position. And the thing that's really cool about this is we can, well, a lot of it's really cool, but the thing that's really cool about this is with modern GPS, we can actually measure the movement of the continent as it's being compressed by that subducting plate in real time, which is just like, I think it's so cool. Okay, so now you got a little bit of a background in plate tectonics. Let's move on and talk about the 10 stories that we have presented here in the music and the art. And there's a whole bunch more than 10 stories in Oregon's geologic history. But what we tried to focus on here was stories that represent events that are both dramatic and significant, but also that are reflected in the landscape, places that you can go out to see, the things that actually built the Oregon that we see today. So our first movement is exotic terranes. And so here, got to go back to the hands. So 300 million years ago, there was no land here. The place that is occupied by Oregon now was simply ocean with a conveyor belt of oceanic crust moving by underneath it and subducting off at the edge of the North American continent, which at that time was over in about where the Idaho border is now. And so for the longest time, if you go out into the middle of the continent in Missouri, there are rocks beneath your feet that are billions of years old. But in Oregon, the oldest rocks beneath our feet are far younger than that, a couple 100 million years old, because for the longest time, we were just riding or floating above that conveyor belt of oceanic crust. Now, most of the time, the oceanic crust just goes down the subduction zone and disappears, but periodically it comes into the subduction zone carrying Hawaii or Japan or some other land mass that has grown on the ocean crust, generally from volcanic activity. And those big chunks don't go down the trench very easily, and instead they stick at the edge of the continent and get plastered onto it. And so we call these exotic terranes because they have traveled some great distance from their area of origin and then just been added on to the edge of the continent. And so this is an example from Hell's Canyon of the earliest one of these terranes. The first one to arrive, we call it the Wallowa terrane because it's very well exposed in the Wallowa Mountains. And what we're looking at here, this gray mass of rock is limestone, formed in a shallow, warm sea in the tropics some 300 million years ago. And it's really cool. You can see this is the layer of limestone has been contorted and folded here in the process of colliding with North America. And the fact that this is tropical limestone means that it has to have traveled at least 1,000 miles north to get here. And so this is the kind of evidence that we see that suggests that these accreted, or these exotic terranes originated far away and have traveled a long way. And so if we look at the map here, the area in green shows the portion of Oregon that is underlain by these exotic terranes. If you dig deep enough anywhere under that green, that's what you're going to run into. The darker green are places where it's actually exposed at the surface and hasn't been buried by younger rock. And so in these ensuing slides, we're going to have that same convention, that the lighter tint is the overall extent of the rocks and the darker tint is where we can actually go out and see them on the surface. Birth of Cascadia, the last piece of accreted or exotic terrain that completed the puzzle and created Oregon in the configuration that we more or less see it today, was called Silesia. And Silesia had a very different origin than the other exotic terranes, which originated, as I said, hundreds of thousands of miles away, traveled a long way to be plastered onto the edge. The Silesia formed just off the coast of ancient Oregon, and it formed as a result of a hotspot. And so a hotspot is and again, geologists are creative about the nomenclature. It's an area of very hot rock that's relatively small, so it's kind of a little spot of hot rock that presumably has originated down near the core where things are very hot, and this narrow plume of hot rock rises towards the surface. When it reaches the surface, it triggers massive volcanic eruptions. And so this is what happened off the coast of ancient Oregon. Hotspot surfaced, and it started creating submarine volcanic eruptions. And those eruptions take on a very different character than many that you have seen today. We're all watching the fabulous eruptions at Kilauea, the lava fountain, and the ones in Iceland with the beautiful lava flows. Underwater, what happens is the lava that comes in contact with the seawater freezes immediately. And then pressure builds up behind the frozen surface and cracks it. And then the lava, liquid lava, shoots out, and it's like when you inflate those balloons for making balloon animals. It's just sort of like, you make this sausage of lava, and it's freezing as it goes, and then it kind of quits. And then another crack occurs, and another one grows out on top of it. And we call these pillow lavas, and this is a photograph of pillow lavas. This is a cross-section across these hot dogs of lava. And so this is really characteristic of a deep sea volcanic eruption. And this went on for quite a long time and built up a body of rock that started at the ocean floor, deep ocean floor, and built all the way up until it was a landmass above the waves. It extends not only most of the way along the Oregon coast, but well up into British Columbia, the southern end of Vancouver Island, as part of this giant mass of lava and volcanic material. That eventually docked against the edge of North America, and the subduction zone, which had been back in here, now jumped out to its current location off of our coast. And so we call this the birth of Cascadia because that is the point at which the modern configuration of this edge of the North American continent came into being. The next movement, called, and I'm going to mangle this, dleg, which is Hannes Kus for tides, is the first rocks that were really true Oregonians. So I'm a Californian. I've been in Oregon now for almost 40 years, but I know I'm still not a true Oregonian. My children, however, born here, they are. So these rocks are true Oregonian rocks because they were actually deposited here in the place that we find them now. The accreted, the exotic terranes had stabilized to the point where they could be a substrate for material that was flowing down. Sediment was being eroded from the highlands to the east and being carried down an ancestral Columbia and Klamath River. That sediment then would get out into the ocean, be distributed by the waves out onto the continental shelf, and build up layer after layer of sand and silt and clay that, as they piled up thicker and thicker, compressed the lower layers into solid sandstone, claystone, and mudstone. Again, great creativity in naming. And one of the more interesting forms of sedimentation that we have, because we tend to like to think of things like sedimentary rocks and geologic processes as being kind of slow, steady, and continuous. And it's true that out in the very deepest parts of the ocean, the deposition is very slow and steady and continuous because you're a long way from land. The sediment doesn't make it out there. But off of our coast, we have a really interesting phenomenon called a turbidity current. And what happens is that sediment piles up on the edge of the continental shelf, which extends 100 miles off of our coast and waters maybe 500 feet deep at the most. And then there's a steep slope down to the deep, deep ocean floor, 10,000 foot deep ocean floor. And there are canyons that have been carved down that steep slope. And so this sediment piles up kind of on the edge of these canyons, and eventually something comes along, like a big earthquake, and destabilizes that sediment, and it landslides into the canyon. And this slurry of sediment and water flows out onto the deep ocean floor and lays down a thick layer of sand. And so instead of this slow, steady rain and accumulation of sediment, these layers are laid down literally in an afternoon. And so some of the earliest rocks that were deposited here in Western Oregon are these turbidite rocks. And nowadays, they're continuing to happen. And in fact, they are one of our best tools for understanding the earthquake history of this subduction zone, because every great earthquake triggers a turbidite, and we can go out and plunk cores into those, and we can actually measure the age and the thickness of these and determine when the earthquakes happened and how big they were, so that we can build a history of those earthquakes. The photograph here is shore acres. These are sands that were deposited fairly close to shore. They have been tilted by tectonic forces. If you haven't been there, you need to go. It's really, really cool. The next movement is the seeking fire. So remember, we had the hotspot, and it created Silesia. Silesia docked with North America. Then what was happening is that the hotspot's still there, and North America and the subduction zone and Silesia and all the exotic terrains are drifting across the hotspot. And because there was subducted ocean crust that was relatively cold in that subduction zone, the hot spot kind of got snuffed by that body of cold rock. And so for a period from about 40 million years to 16 million years, the hot spot didn't show up as a single focus point. Its volcanic activity was spread out all over Oregon from about the Willamette Valley out to the eastern border as this heat tried to find its way through the mess that was the exotic terranes to get to the surface. And so we have volcanic activity spread all over the area, virtually every kind of volcanic activity you can imagine, except for the pillow basalts, which are out in the ocean. And one of the most pronounced for this area were great caldera eruptions. And so, again, we're familiar with things like the Kilauea eruption, the Iceland eruptions. That is basalt lava. It's very, very fluid. It flows rapidly away from the vent and travels great distances, but it doesn't really pile up much into a volcano. Kind of at the other end of the spectrum, we have rhyolite eruptions. And rhyolite magma is very, very sticky and pasty. And so if you have a large body of it develop underground, it builds up a tremendous amount of gas pressure because are gases dissolved in that molten rock. But they can't easily bubble out like they can with basalt. And the reason that you see that fountain at Kilauea is because the gas is readily bubbling out and driving that great fountain of basalt into the air. What happens with a rhyolite body is that the pressure builds up and builds up until finally something cracks the carapace that's holding it in, and all of that molten rhyolite magma flashes into foam as the gas comes out of solution. So it's exactly like taking a beer bottle, heating it up, and popping the lid off, and it all turns into foam and comes out the top. In this case, that material gets blown into the stratosphere, and ash settles down over the landscape over wide areas. And that's how we get things like the painted hills. Each white band in this image is an ash layer from a giant caldera eruption, and each red layer on top is the soil that developed in the interval between that eruption and the next one. So in this slide right here, we're probably looking at 12 or 15 of these giant explosive eruptions. And one of the things that's really interesting and unique about that is that they have led to the preservation of fossils of land animals that is almost unique in the world. Typically, fossils don't get preserved very well on land because land surfaces erode and they get removed. But these blankets of ash would trap animals and plants and preserve them so that we have an incredible record of the development of mammals throughout this area. The next event, the Ecstatic Immemorial. Eventually, the hotspot managed to burn its way through the subducting slab and get back to the surface. And it arose in southeast Oregon. And when its arrival was heralded by the eruption of the Columbia River basalt, which is one of 3 flood basalt provinces known in the world. And these are very different volcanoes from anything you can imagine or have ever seen or heard of. There were huge pools of basalt magma beneath the surface, and they erupted through fissures, cracks in the ground that were 10, 20, 30 miles long, and they sprayed lava literally thousands of feet into the air along the length of these giant cracks, and the lava fell back down to the ground and flowed away. And remember I said basalt lava is very fluid, so it can travel a long way. The vents for these series of flows were over here, and individual lava flows traveled from here all the way over to here, 400 miles. And this didn't happen once, it happened at least 100 times until the entire area that you see outlined here in red was covered. And it happened in a very short period of time, about 1 million years, which doesn't sound like short period of time to you, but believe me, in geologic terms, that's a lot of lava to pour out in that period of time. And in fact, it happened so quickly that there was almost never an opportunity for a landscape to reassert itself on this lava surface, enough time for soil to develop and plants to grow. There's only a couple of places where the interval was long enough. So for most of this period of time, much of that area that you see outlined in red was a barren black lava plain, stretching for literally hundreds of miles in every direction. It was truly an amazing outpouring of lava, and the kind of thing that we really don't want to see these days. That's the kind of thing that ends civilization. And then towards the end of that period, we had more of these big caldera eruptions down in this part of the world, producing great piles of ash. And this is an example from Leslie Gulch out on the Owyhee River of one of these ash deposits. Our next event is called upwelling. So this is the development of what we call the basin and range topography in Oregon. And once again, what happens is that beneath Nevada, over a long period of time, there has been a large body of warm mantle that is slowly rising. It's not a hot spot. It's not about to create a spreading center, but it's warmer than the surrounding rock, and so it's causing sort of a big blister to inflate under Nevada. And that's fine. That rock that's inflating is fluid, and it can easily flow and stretch. But the crust on top of it, remember, there's 30 or 40 miles of hard rock, it doesn't stretch. And so in order to accommodate that bulge, it breaks up into pieces, and which allows it to extend. So imagine, if you will, we've got a bookshelf, and we have a bunch of books that are all the same size, and they're all lined up vertical next to each other, and they occupy that much bookshelf. If we tip them over on their side and allow them to slide past each other, suddenly they become a lot longer. So we've stretched that block. They become a lot thinner, and if you look at the top surface of the books, instead of being flat, it now goes up and down and up and down, because one side of the book is tilted up and the other part is tilted down. And so that is why Nevada is covered with these great big long mountain ranges separated by deep valleys. The mountain ranges are the up-tilted part of one block, and the valleys are the down-tilted part of the next block. So that basin and range extension and stretching and development of what we call fault block mountains and their accompanying basins has slowly been creeping into southern Oregon, and has created the Oregon Basin and Range with features like this, this is Lake Abert, and this is the Abert Rim. And there's a fault that runs along the base of this rim that you can actually go out and stand on. And every couple thousand years, that fault moves about 6 feet, and the rim gets a little bit higher, and the lake basin gets a little bit lower. And over time, you build some really impressive mountain fronts like the Steens Mountain, which is about 6,000 feet high above the basin. The next movement is bloom. So although the subduction has been going on since the birth of Cascadia for close to 50 million years, the volcanism associated with it has kind of been distributed. And it's only been in the last 5 or 6 million years that it has coalesced into that beautiful narrow volcanic arc that you saw in the diagram to begin with. And so this is sort of the origin of a cascade range that looks like what we see today. A narrow band of volcanic rock, and most of the high cascades actually are little basalt flows, little cinder cones, and a little bit of a basalt flow that comes out of it. And then those are, there's a series of snow-capped stratovolcanoes that line up along that. And so one of the things that's kind of interesting about this is that the volcanoes like Mount Hood and Mount Jefferson, Three Sisters, they are what are called stratovolcanoes. And so they form by a mixture of, remember, basalt lava flows away and travels long distances, rhyolite lava explodes. These are what's called andesite lava. And so andesite lava is much more sticky and pasty than basalt, but it still flows better than rhyolite. And so it creates what's called an flow, where the outside surface of the advancing lava flow freezes 5 or 10 feet deep and then breaks up into a bunch of jumbled blocks. And the flow continues to sort of advance within this carapace of broken, rubbly rock. And so it moves much more slowly and it forms more steeper slopes because it's more viscous and doesn't flow away as easily. And if you're near one that is actively moving, it makes the most remarkable tinkly, clinkly sound as pieces freeze and break and fall off as it slowly works its way along. And so because it makes steeper slopes, we end up building a stratovolcano cone as these flows build up one on top of the other. But the really interesting thing about this is, I mean, we look at those volcanoes and we think, oh, they've been there forever. They're actually very short-lived phenomena. Mount Hood is about 500,000 years old, and in another 500,000 years, the glaciers will have ground it down to nothing, and a new volcano will start someplace else along the chain. So there's this constant cycle of volcanoes developing, growing, dying, being eroded away, and replaced as the new volcano pops up elsewhere along the chain. The photograph, of course, that we're looking at here is Crater Lake. It is a rare instance in the Cascades where we have an explosive rhyolite type eruption that threw ash and pumice great distances and left behind a caldera. But this is very small in comparison to the ones during the Seeking Fire period, where Crater Lake's 5 miles in diameter. Those calderas were 30 miles in diameter. Absolutely enormous. Okay, our next event is the onset of glaciation. So about 2.5 million years ago, the Earth's climate cooled, and it's entered a period of ice ages, typically lasting 50 to 100,000 years, with intervals of 10 or 20,000 years in between when the climate warmed. And that cycling between cold and warm, it was due to minute variations in the Earth's orbit around the sun. The most recent ice age peaked 20,000 years ago and was pretty much over by 11,000 years ago. So we are 11,000 years into the interglacial period between this ice age and what presumably would have been the next ice age, but we'll get to that. The future in a bit. So the impacts in Oregon were widespread. The actual ice sheet that covered the northern hemisphere only made it as far south as Olympia along our coast. But all along the Cascades was a giant ice cap. There's an ice cap out on the Steens Mountain, the Wallowa Mountains, and several other small ice caps out here in the Elkhorns and a few strawberry ranges. But there were other manifestations of the glaciation as well. All of these basin and range basins, which are closed basins, they don't drain, filled up with water because the climate was wetter. And so we developed a network of gigantic lakes that are, in many cases, now represented just by dried up remnants like Lake Abert or Summer Lake or alkali flats. And the other manifestation was broad areas of loess. Loess is rock flour that is created by the ice sheet as it grinds across the bedrock. That rock flour is then washed away into rivers, carried towards the ocean. The silt, the rock flour is silt-sized particles. It builds up on the floodplains of those rivers, and the wind picks it up and blows it and covers large areas. So all of the wheatlands out in eastern Oregon and eastern Washington are sitting on a thick layer of this loess. And in fact, in the Portland Hills, we have up to 70 feet that accumulated where the winds coming down the Columbia River Gorge carrying that silt would blast it out across the Portland Hills and it would accumulate. And this photograph is of the Elliott Glacier on Mount Hood. The The ice is currently way back up here. I remember the first time I went up and hiked up here about 25 years ago, the ice was down around the corner. Another example of the kinds of changes that are happening in the future. But this is a really great example of lateral moraines, which are a distinctive feature of glaciers. So as the glacier is flowing, rock falls onto it from higher up on the mountain, and the rock is carried as the ice moves down, and eventually the ice melts away and leaves behind the rock. And so if this goes on for a long enough period of time, you build up these big piles of rock, levees of rock on either side of the glacier because of that constant flow of rock and then the melting and ablation of ice. And so we developed these very distinctive landforms. Wallowa Lake is another example of that. The lake is hemmed in by those moraines. The next event are the Missoula floods, Stasis and Torrent. So the Stasis part is that the ice sheet that covered the northern hemisphere advanced south in Montana until it got to about Missoula. And at that point, it dammed up the Clark Fork of the Columbia River and produced a giant lake in the Bitterroot Valley that ended up being a half a mile deep, 60 miles long, 20 miles wide. And eventually, the lake got so high that the ice dam floated because ice floats in water. And that shattered dam allowed all of the water to drain out, and it went roaring down the Columbia River across eastern Washington and down the Columbia, across the Columbia Plateau in Oregon, through the Columbia River Gorge, and on out to the Pacific. So much water came down that the floodwaters backed up into the Willamette and Tualatin Valley all the way to Eugene and filled the Willamette Valley, Tualatin Valley, Portland Basin to an elevation of 400 feet above sea level with water. Again, the thing that's really amazing about this is it didn't just happen once. It happened at least 40 times. And so every time one of these floods would come through, it would leave behind a layer of silt, which was actually loess that it had picked up off of the Columbia Plateau as it raged across there, and it would settle out when it kind of slowed down in the Willamette Valley. And so this is an exposure of that silt left behind by the flood. We call these rhythmites, each layer. So each combination of a white band and a dark band is a single flood layer. And so even in this slope here, you can see at least 15 or 20 of these events. And this is on Highway 26 out at the 185th Avenue interchange. And so this happened time and time and time again, and completely reshaped the Columbia River Gorge by removing every bit of loose rock and built the prime agricultural soils in the Willamette Valley by stealing them from Washington. And now we get to the future, the Anthropocene. It's not as much fun for me to talk about as the geology because I have to live in the Anthropocene. And so the Anthropocene is the name that geologists are considering giving to the modern era in recognition of the fact that humans are now a modifying force on the planet that is of similar magnitude to many natural processes. So let's look a little bit in this slide at the the areas of impact of human activities throughout the state. The areas in yellow are agriculture, where the ground surface has been plowed and planted. The areas in green are both public and private timberlands, about 90% of which have been cut at some point. And the black lines and clots here are roads. And so virtually every activity that we undertake, agriculture, forestry, mining, urban development, road building, involves digging and breaking up the soil cover that is the natural skin of the earth. And soil is not just something that sits there. Soil is a very complex biological and physical mass that develops over thousands of years from solid rock. It's really hard to grow stuff in solid rock. You need to have that long process that converts that solid rock into this living layer that supports virtually all life on the planet. And so everything that we do in terms of development disrupts that soil and it causes it to erode. And that increased erosion then leads to sediment being transported into our streams, out into the ocean. In the ocean, it smothers marine life and contributes to marine dead zones. And all of our activities also in hilly areas lead to increased landsliding and debris flows and mud flows as we disrupt that natural surface. So we're living in a time when human impacts on the landscape are, as I said, approaching the scale of natural features. We haven't yet got to the point where we are making earthquakes or volcanoes, but as far as the landscape that we live in and the life that is supported by that landscape, we are making dramatic changes. And over the lifetime of our children, the world that we know is going to largely disappear and be very, very different. And so, as I think about that, I'd like to sort of look at the geologic perspective of what's happening here. And think back to the fact that 20,000 years ago, during the peak of the last ice age, I showed you the slide. Northern hemisphere was covered with ice, Cascades were covered with ice, giant lakes in eastern Oregon, and sea level was 400 feet deeper. That's a really dramatic change. If we look into the future, 10 million years into the future, San Francisco will have moved 230 miles north along the San Andreas Fault and will be just a little south of Brookings. Every volcano in the Cascade will have completely disappeared and been replaced by something else. And even in the absence of the ongoing human-caused mass extinction of life, virtually all species would have gone extinct over that period of time. And so I like to think about the fact that this plate tectonic cycle of creation and destruction will continue to create new life and new landscapes into a future that we can only imagine. And with that, I'd like to take the opportunity to invite our moderator, Linda Tesner, up for our Q&A, and if our artists could come as well.
Hi, good evening. My name is Linda Tesner, and I had the great pleasure and huge education in learning about the Oregon Origins Project and the Birth of Cascadia because I was invited to write about the music that Matthew Packwood composed, and then the 10 various pieces of studio artwork that the 10 commissioned artists produced for us. And I can't tell you how much I learned about not only the artwork, but the geology and then the music. It just has been a completely complex project, and I can't imagine how difficult the collaboration has been for 3 separate and very different disciplines to kind of cross-pollinate and kind of conjoin into this one magnificent project. So anyway, now we have the opportunity to ask some questions, but first, can I just pass the microphone, and could each of you introduce yourselves, please? Oh, you have a microphone, awesome.
Hello, my name is Ken Selden. I am the orchestra director, and I've been working with Matthew for the last few weeks to put the performance together.
So beautiful.
I would say a few months, but that's fine. Matthew Packwood, director of the Oregon Origins Project and composer of this work.
Hi, I'm Amanda Triplett. I'm an intermedia fiber artist, and I made the piece for the Missoula floods.
I'm Christine Bourdette. I'm a sculptor and drawer and printmaker, and I focused on the Silesia event.
I'm Sara Siestreem. I'm a Hannes Koos tribal member, artist, and educator, and I worked with the South Coast.
I'm still Ian Madin.
I'm Michael Boonstra. I'm a visual artist and educator, and I worked on the Upwelling section.
Hi, everybody. My name is Juniper Harrower, and I'm an ecologist, also a multimedia artist and an educator. I worked on the accelerated unraveling, which is the end piece with thinking about the Anthropocene.
Hi, I'm Daniela Molnar. I am a visual artist and poet. I worked on the first movement, Exotic Terranes.
I am Leah Wilson, visual artist, and I worked on Bloom.
I'm Claire Burbridge, a visual artist as well, and I worked on the painting called The Seeking Fire, which was based on the Painted Hills.
So can I open up the audience to questions? It's a little bit hard to see from here.
I have a request.
Tell us.
Could we please have the artist's pictures up and the artist just go over them a little bit with us?
I don't know if that's possible.
We may not have time actually for that. I'm sorry.
Yes?
Where are the pieces?
Oh, that is such a good question. Would you like me to answer that? You can see this exhibition of these 10 works of art at Stelo Gallery in the Park Blocks in downtown Portland, and I cannot recommend going to see them enough. It's a very beautiful exhibition where I think you'll enjoy just the visual impact of the work. But then now that you've seen the geology and you've heard the music, you'll see how beautifully they complement and dovetail with the rest of this incredibly enormous narrative. Other questions? Yes.
Hi.
Wait.
We have a question.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for this fascinating and inspiring combination of understanding about the origins of Oregon, the geologic origins, and combining that with visual depictions of these events. I'm wondering how the artists were chosen, the visual artists were chosen for each of the musical movements.
It's such a good question. Matthew, do you want to describe that?
Yes, so I'm not a visual artist, so I leaned heavily on those who are. Stephanie Snyder, Juniper Harrower was very helpful, an artist named Nan Curtis, to help think about artists who are thinking about these ideas about place, and especially about, often of them, they're working with materials from place, like pigments. Beyond that, it was finding people who I kind of responded to. Since we were going to be collaborating, there was that element as well. Once we got to that stage, then we had a list of events, and I offered them up to the artists to select their preferred events. And of course, we had to kind of do some finessing to make sure everybody found something inspiring in the work, but that's the general process.
Yes?
Just curious.
Leah.
Thank you. I was just curious how much time you all spent together. I think maybe was there a field trip out into the landscape, and did you converse and share dialogues? And I'm just curious to know how the artists, if anyone could speak to that conversation with musicians and geologists and share something.
Somebody like to speak to that? You all had the experience of identifying the, Amanda, go ahead.
I'd be happy to speak to that. So we had the initial meeting where Ian actually gave us that brilliant talk, or a different version of it, and we got to ask questions and talk to Matthew, and then we went on our site visits, and for me that was such a wonderful moment, our trip, because we were able to exchange ideas and dive really deep, and also ask tons of questions from Ian, who's extremely knowledgeable. And from there, we just we went into our little bubbles, and periodically Matthew would send something, and it would take me a minute to respond. And I would send some pictures, and he would inquire about the process. And oftentimes it was interesting because Matthew, obviously as a musician, is thinking very musically and very time-based. And so he would ask me a question and it would take me a second because I would have to translate that into visual language, or like, what does he mean? And it felt very specific to music. So, but it was really cool. And I think a lot of times, for instance, Matthew's composition actually kind of changed my whole approach to the piece. So yeah, it was very helpful and very cool to get to work with a variety of people with different knowledge.
Anybody else want to speak to that?
Oh, I want to share something. So went on a field trip with Ian and Matthew, and so firstly they took me to see the Mima Mounds. Has anybody in here do you know what the Mima Mounds are? Okay, I see some nodding and some hands. So they're fascinating. I'm from California. I'm recently moved to Oregon. I teach at Reed College now. And the Mima Mounds are like these massive, just strange mounds in the soil. There's millions, all over Oregon. And they have been plowed over to make the agricultural expanse that we have now, wheat fields and different things. So Ian and Matthew took me to go on a little field trip, which meant we were all piled in the car, and Ian kind of narrated the geology the whole drive back to the location where we were trying to find the Mima Mounds. He wanted to show me a specific spot, and we got there, and we were like parking in a little neighborhood area and trying to figure out how to get to the trail. We had to jump a fence. We went back and we're like climbing around. It was pretty fun. And went back and spent a few hours sitting on the mounds and thinking about the changing landscapes, and stopped and looked at the cherry orchards and just the expanses of wheat, which Oregon is a major exporter of.
Michael Boonstra, do you want to say anything about your trip to the Albert Rim?
Sure. So I was in a much less populated part of the state. So we met at Abert Rim, and it's a place that I was pretty familiar with in terms of spending some time out there over the last decade or so. And but being there with Ian was amazing. Being able to him just narrate like how this place evolved and over time, and then being able to go with him and actually see where that fault was. It's kind of hidden in plain sight. It's now that I'm there, brought students there after our visit, it was right there, but probably 8 to 10 times I'd been there before and never really seen it and known what it was. And so that was just really fascinating to get to know a place that was somewhat familiar in a much more deep way, and to gain a lot of understanding about how it came to be the way it is today.
It's such enviable experiences, really. And other questions? Oh, my goodness. Okay, yes?
Please use the mic with your question.
Okay.
And I get it, yay. Okay, so in your lecture, I don't know if everyone's comfortable with that word, but that's what we did, and we had a great time. But you were talking about what's left in the geological record. What do you think will be left of us and our activities in the geological record when the geologists of an epoch or an eon in front of us come and look back at it?
She wants to know what'll be left of humans. What's our impact? What are we going to look like in the geologic?
Well, yeah, I can't give you a precise vision of what that is, and it kind of depends on how far you look in the future. We all know about climate change. Every prediction that has been made about it from a scientific basis has not only more or less come to pass, but almost always been at the worst end of the possible range of outcomes. And so, I think we are going to see a great extinction event like the last 4 or 5 natural ones. I think we are going to see parts of the planet become uninhabitable because of heat, and I think we are going to see unprecedented political and humanitarian changes as everyone that lives in the tropics and adjacent areas tries to find a way to survive in climates that are becoming hostile and uninhabitable. So that's the next couple hundred years. I hope that's an adequate answer, but I don't really like to think about it.
Juniper, do you have anything?
Sadly, I don't have much optimism that we're going to fix this.
Sarah, it looked like you have something to say about that.
I just said thank you for saying that. Thank you for saying that awful thing you just said.
Juniper, do you have anything you'd like to say about that? Juniper was responsible for the final, the Anthropocene image that we saw.
Well, yeah, so I'm a climate change ecologist. Before I was an art professor at Reed. That's what I did my doctorate in, so I think a lot about the biosphere and, what's happening. I worked in the deserts in Joshua Tree. But I will say one thing about working with this kind of time range, it really required a shift in interscalic consciousness and thinking about these epochs that were so long, so many millions of years, and we really haven't been here for that long, people on the planet, life as we think about it. And just as we've kind of journeyed through this experience together tonight, and all of the artists and the musicians, and people thinking about this, it's like all these millions of years of movement, like also brought us to this moment right here, right now, which is kind of amazing. And so I was sitting with that a lot tonight, and just how the short and the small can feel so large, but in the grand scheme of things, it's all quite tiny. And yeah, that's really all I've got.
Well, the entire project involved a tremendous amount of speculative imagination on the part of everyone involved. So everyone had to take a tremendous leap of imagination and try to conjure something that none of us has ever experienced, from the very earliest movement to the future. But other questions?
So,
I think there are other questions.
Could I add one thing to my
Yes,
answer?
please. Yeah, of course.
In light of that really negative future that I envisioned, go out now and love it. Go experience these landscapes, experience the life that we have while it's still there.
I should add, I feel somewhat responsible to add that this project is part about celebrating the land. It's about honoring the land. It's about becoming aware of the land. And that awareness, part of the hope that's embedded in that awareness is that people will want to care for it, right? You see the beauty manifested not only in the planet, but in creative responses to the planet. And so there is a desire embedded in this project, which is by coming together and thinking about place, we'll realize how fragile the place is and how much it needs us.
Could I add one thing to that conversation? I think you're right, Linda. It was a leap of imagination to move into a time period that was eons ago. At the same time, the past didn't go anywhere. Like, we were literally interacting with deep time in these places, and we are right now too. So it's not a leap of imagination into a deep time past. We are in it. The changes Ian was talking about are occurring presently. It's not something that will happen, it's something that's happening, and the past is also still happening. So I think it's both imaginative and it's very much about the present moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautifully said. Thank you.
And I was going to, and sort of by extension, it's about constant change and flux and all that, which I think is underpinning everything that we've been dealing with here.
Other questions? I'm trying to find the microphone. Oh, great. Thank you so much.
I recently participated in a somewhat related project about Selilo Falls, in which it became apparent we have reliably carbon-dated moccasins dating back 18,400 years. That means there were people living in the Columbia Gorge when those Missoula floods came through 400 feet deep and 60 miles an hour. So there have been extinction events as far as those people knew already. And we're sitting on part of it.
Thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, I think that's so important to be thinking about as well, is that when we're talking about environmental, and like rocks, right? We're talking about like, as currently so many living beings and people are deeply, deeply suffering right now. And, I think really sitting with the reality that all of these things are intersectional, and the way that humans, especially in Western, colonial spaces, have decided to inhabit and regulate the landscape, is really why we're seeing the acceleration into extinction and these things that we're all sitting here with the heavy heart, as we're also thinking through a very, very deep time scale. Like, it's a lot to be kind of toggling back and forth when we're dealing with the reality of lived extreme crisis in the moment, like to also deeply care about making paintings about rocks too, which I do, but.
Juniper, that's right when this project came in, or when I started really trying to visualize the floods and what it would have been like to just actually see them. It was right during the floods in Asheville, and it felt, it was very heartbreaking to watch that narrative unfold and the people whose lives were tremendously impacted by it. And then I was observing the floods and, kind of learning from them. But yeah, it's real and it's here, and it's also our history too, so.
Hi.
Hi, thanks for such a great interdisciplinary project. This is really exhilarating to watch and enjoy, so thank you for everybody involved. I have a question for the folks who composed the music. And specifically, can you kind of walk us through or tell us about how you chose what style of music and what kind of tempo and velocity to match the different natural events like colliding planets and erupting volcanoes and floods? Maybe you can walk us through like how you chose and composed those different pieces.
That would be you, Matthew.
That's a tall order. Gosh, does this have an answer? I think I would ask for someone else to respond really to this, but so imagine a wild place that you've been to, right? You have an experience in that place, right? You're connected to it in some way. when I am in these places, I have as many of the artists here do, I have a creative response to it, not just a response of interconnection. I feel like there is a two-way thing going on. And from that point was the genesis of this whole project, is that I think actually everyone in this room, and perhaps everyone on the planet, has that kind of innate experience, and how it manifests in you and how you share it is your own. But artists, it's kind of inevitable that leads to an expression, right? I'm getting very in the clouds here. To come down a few thousand feet. Once I met Ian, who speaks very specifically about origins of places and how the shapes, all the gestures, you get really, and for me, you get really into the physicality of it. You get into like the movement of the plate or the earthquake or the, you know, in the first movement, the kind of very small shuddering earthquakes, right? There's so much delicacy as well as drama. And musically, I've said this before, but it's actually kind of almost intuitively to be able to match that idea into a musical shape or gesture comes naturally. And I don't know how that, and I think there's the inevitable part of being an artist, right? Where does that come from? So I can't answer that. But what I can say is the geology was my way in to find a way to express the place, because it offers a moving, time-based thing that you can kind of start to get your head around. But I would also add that geology is just one story, right? There is the distance between geology and your experience of that place. And throughout that space is an opportunity for the imagination to run wild. And I think that, thankfully, all of these artists here, their imaginations have run considerably wild, and I'm so honored to be able to work with them. I've also been honored to work with Ken, who helped me kind of steer this ship, which was in the clouds a lot, into some sort of shape that could actually be performed, right? So you have these ideas, but actually getting them to be expressible through other means is a challenge in and of itself. So that's the insufficient answer for you.
Ken, do you have anything to add to that as a conductor?
I think compared to all of the other artists here, my work on this project is less involved in geology, and I take the notes that Matthew has written and work with the musicians to make it sound, so I only know geology very vaguely through the discussion that we had with Matthew, but I also think that for a lot of composers, there's an external inspiration, but the music that they end up writing is about something beyond the inspiration. And for me, what was interesting about this project was, as I got to know Matthew's music and I got to know him better, and the actual work of bringing it to life in sound is very technical. You have to play the right notes at the right time and get the right tempos, and but I think what ends up happening is a musical experience beyond the original inspiration, and I found that to be really interesting. And I think it probably, this was the first time that for the musicians and for me, we got to see which artwork matched with which movement. And I went to the gallery and I saw the artwork and I heard about it, but I never matched it up until today. So that was really exciting for me as well.
Thank you. Other questions? It's coming to you.
Okay. You have an audience tonight. You have an audience tomorrow afternoon. How are you getting all of this information, the visual information,
the musical information, the geological information to a wider audience. It shouldn't be just so compact.
I agree. Matthew?
You'll need to talk to our marketing department about that. We're a young project. We've been around 2-3 years now. Give us some time.
In my mind, listening to this and experiencing this, there's many layers of translation happening. You're starting with this story of geology and the experiences you had visiting these sites and what you've learned and the data, but then you're translating it into the sound, and you are, in real time conducting these musicians, and then each of you needed to translate from your assignment and your epoch into an actual physical, visual piece. And you've talked a little bit about musically how that process worked for you. One thing I'm specifically curious about, because I feel like each one of you could probably give an hour-long talk on this, of how that translation went for you, but I'm specifically wondering if any of you felt just rapid clarity on what that would be and what that manifestation would be, kind of like you talked about, that creative reaction to it, versus those who maybe had a collection of ideas and iterated through them, or some who just kind of really needed to play and explore in the space. So it's very broad. I think each of you would have a response to that, but I'd be curious to hear about it.
I'll speak to that. I mentioned I'm a Hannes tribal member. So I'm really from here, like all the way to those moccasins that you're talking about. So I have ancestors here. And so when you came to me with this project, I was really happy you were doing it for the kinds of things you're talking about, and that all the people in this room are really closely related to, and that's a love of the earth and a recognition of how important this place is. I also happen to have a geology degree, so I've been through the VIII science on how this place was made, the earth side of it. So I love that. I love those rocks, and knew a lot of that. I studied with Scott Burns at PSU. So my painting philosophy, and that's not a word I usually use, but since we're in this conversation, I would say my painting philosophy is based on geologic process and natural processes. So it already was what I've always been doing. How I describe how I make my paintings is based on those kind of systems. It wasn't really spiritually or culturally appropriate necessarily for me to go to those places with the group. And I've also had a really kind of busy year with some health stuff and work stuff. And so when he came to me, I was also really scared about the commitment, because there's a lot of those culture clashes that are heartbreaking that don't need to come into that conversation, right? Like, so much great heart doesn't need to get complex with that. And all of the commitment, I was really concerned. But our great curator, our great leadership here was like, no, we want you in this project and the work will work, and allowed me to put in a basket that's from that place, that those trees have grown with those stones, and ceramic that also refers to the whole circle of this conversation, and a painting that is informed by these natural processes and all of these things we're talking about. And those paintings are built to speak to you and to stir up your connection to those places and that part of your spirit that understands this whole conversation. So to get to be a part of this practice that we're doing here, but in a way that only made sense to me, being allowed that kind of freedom was really a generosity. So yeah, I knew immediately what it would be, but it was completely different from the whole project. And I waited until today. He's been sending us samples and all the stuff the whole time, but I wanted to be with you, and I wanted to hear it for the first time with you, because time-based stuff is super incredible, right? Like, we're having what I would consider a ceremonial experience, us being here and having this conversation, listening to you with the hour-long thing you did for everybody. Like, all of these things are in keeping with my cultural practice of what a ceremony is, right? We're all getting changed from this, and they're recording it too, so don't worry, PBS will get it. And it was really amazing to sit and listen to your master musicians playing it and watching you conduct them, and it didn't sound anything like what it sounds like to me. And I'm all over the state of Oregon too, right? So in all those places, I am accountable to the 9 tribes of Oregon, and I get to go to those places and be there, and that is not what it sounds like to me. But there were moments in the silence immediately after the strings, there would be a bell, you know? And I was like, oh yeah, that one. I know that sound, right? And there were other moments in the lyric of the music that it would be the birds, you know? There would be those like moments that I would hear, and it's that cross-cultural reality of the time that we're sharing, that everybody's doing their very best in this room to do something for what we're talking about, you know? And so I think that that's a massive privilege. And it was really moving to listen to the other artists talk and hear about the field trips and all that, you know, I mean, it's really incredible what's been done here. I can't get my head around the scope and the ambition of this project. And the thing that's so heartbreaking about music is that ephemeral thing. It's like this, you know, this gift of the musicians putting all of this together, and then it's gone. It's kind of what you're saying, like, what? All of that, and then that's it? Tomorrow's the other, you know? So now I've definitely heard enough of my voice. But anyway, I wanted to answer that one, so good question.
That's a good question.
Thanks.
Anybody else? Claire? Anything? Leah?
I came onto this project later than everybody else, and so I didn't get to go on a site visit. I get to go on my site visit in a couple of weeks, so I'm pretty excited about that. So you asked how fast it was. It needed to be really, really fast for me. And I had a conversation with Ian, and he's talking about all of these amazing cones and the volcanoes, and then he mentioned one, and he called it a cow pie. And so I wanted to really see what that cow pie was in comparison to those big cones out there. That's Newberry, by the way, which is the largest volcano that we have here in Oregon. It's not the largest, the tallest, because it is the cow pie, but it spreads out, and it's the widest volcano that we have. And the way I was able to do my site visit was using technology. And so Ian, in his career, I don't want to speak for you exactly, but you really did head that LiDAR program, didn't you? Which is absolutely amazing technology that we have. So using light and lasers, we're able to see images of the Earth as if we didn't have all of the trees that we have in Oregon, so we can't actually see what all of the forms and the structures look like. And so I flew up and down the Cascades, looking at all of these lava formations, and when I got to that cow pie, it really stopped me in my tracks, because it is so wondrous, it is so beautiful, and it is so bizarre. And I've been there before, which is another reason why I chose that, because it's very important to me in my work to be able to work with the place as a collaborator, and so we had to kind of do it, not in real time though. And to be able to see that place in a way that I've never been able to see it before, I wanted to really bring that wonder and that sense of awe into the work that I made, and then bring that to you. So that came pretty fast. So when that sense of awe, that wonder strikes me, that's when I know that I have to work with it.
One more question, maybe? What do you think, Matthew? One more? Looks like.
I also am an artist who has a science background, so this was pretty fascinating for me. And I am planning on going to your closing talk on July 12th, and I was wondering which one of you are going to be there, and how, if it's going to be more personal about each one of your artworks.
Matthew, do you know the answer to that? I know I don't.
I don't think it's the full group. I think it's probably a subset of us. Probably everyone knows who's going to be there, but I don't. So, but it's certainly worth going to. It's enough of us that we'll be able to dig a little deeper, maybe, into the work.
I think you make a beautiful point, though. I feel like the intersection between art and science, however you define those two disciplines, is really such an important way for us to view the future, both concretely and imaginatively. So I feel like this project has been a fantastic opportunity to play in those waters. Matthew, do you want to say anything? Any final remarks?
I would just say my thanks to all of you, the artists, and you, the audience, for being here. Let's give our artists another round of applause. Thank you. And our crew, who are back there doing the hard work, with another round of applause for them. Thank you. So, thank you all for coming out tonight. Really appreciate you.